Oh, sorry, Peter, they don't say that again. That was funny. Because now they like something they go, yeah, before yeah, I know. Yeah, you get yeah, right. Really, yeah, really. Yeah, literally, my niece, my sister sent me a picture of her coming with a whole bag, okay? This is like, dollar and she comes home with this bag, got her all these things, and just like, you know, your daughter, moms are in contact, and my mom. I had somebody else here, no, not much money when we get a story. I'm like,
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. No,
Everybody, I think we're gonna settle in and get started. Can everyone get the sign-in sheet or receive the sign-in sheet? If you have not, please sign in before you leave. There's also a little QR code there. Please take it to the survey for training. Please take those. I think there's a section in there to recommend future trainings if there's something you guys want. We'll easily get that. We have a really good group, so thank you so much. It's a wide variety of agencies. I would like to, if we can, just do introductions. That way everybody kind of has an idea of where we're all from. I can start off. My name is Simon. I make street outreach at the emergency shelter for Lancaster, and I work with the Office for the Homelessness Coalition. Basically, like an oversight reporting on the conflict. Thank you all for coming. Peter, do you mind?
Sure, I'm Peter Brownstein. I am with Pennsylvania Adult Teen Challenge and Naaman Center. I do community outreach, and it's great to be here. Very happy for the invitation. Thanks.
My name is Megan Schertzer. I work at the Factory Ministries as an adult advocate, essentially a social worker.
My name is Lashana. I'm a senior life coach at Watershed Mission for women and residential.
My name is Emily Towers. I'm at Water Street Mission as an interim life coach supervisor.
My name is Amelia. I'm a social worker at Real Life Community Services in Denver. And I'm Becca, and I'm also a social worker at Real Life Community Services.
Jason Ruskowski for Water Street Ministries. I'm the director of shelter services. That would have been a shock.
Peter Anderson, Senior Life Coach for Men's Transition Program.
I'm Lily Addy, I'm the Vice President of Residential Life at Water Street Mission.
Danielle Kissinger, I'm the Social Services Program Manager at Ministries. My name is Kristen Hershey, and I am Co-Director of Conestoga Valley Seeds, which is a nonprofit in CV.
I'm Christine Gilfil, and I'm the Director at Domestic Violence Services of Lancaster County.
And I'm Jessica Smith, and I work on Josiah's team, and I'm interning. I'm an intern with Millersville MSW program.
Ellen Souders, and I'm a Senior Property Manager for Community Basics. We're a nonprofit.
Brian Hubbard, I'm the Program Coordinator, the Lancaster County Youth Intervention Center, Delta Residential.
I'm Matthew Salt, also a Senior Life Coach at Water Street Ministries in our Men's Residential Program.
I'm Heather Kantz, Water Street Mission, and I'm a social worker.
I'm Roberto Lopez. I'm out at Water Street Mission. I'm a social worker.
I'm Sean Willis, and I'm a social worker at the Water Street Mission.
And I'm Ronald Gibson. I'm a Senior Life Coach in a residential program for the men at Water Street Mission.
I'm Jan Lapp. I work at Water Street Mission, Senior Life Coach for Bridge Program for the women.
John Richard Meza, Life Coach Supervisor for the men's residential program.
Dan Mesher, Director at TLC. Galvin Folks, Case Manager at TLC.
I'm Jamie Luke, who work at Water Street, well, in family engagement.
I'm Andrea, I'm a Mission Navigator for Lancaster General Care Connection.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. There will probably be a few people who will trickle in here in the next couple minutes. See you. So without further ado, I'll do Simon with the Naaman Center, and I'll allow you. Okay, but thank you very much for coming. It'd be great. Very great. So, thank you guys for your time. Well, good morning. It's exciting to be here. Different social workers, life coaches, outreach. So a lot of experience in this room and just a lot of heart. So I am a social worker. Again, I interned when I was at Millersville. I interned at Naaman Center. And so I was working at Bohaven part-time at that time. So I am with Naaman Center, Pennsylvania Adult Teen Challenge, and Ascend Ministries. And that sometimes confuses me, so it's okay if it confuses you. But just real quick, Ascend Ministries is something that we rebranded because of additional services that we were offering. So that's kind of an overarching name that you'll still see. Pennsylvania Adult Teen Challenge, again, is our long-term faith-based program in Rarrisburg. And then Naaman Center, we have outpatient sites, Lancaster, Lebanon, Dalton County. So it's interesting, we have outpatient sites or have had outpatient sites or connections with a lot of the facilities that are present here. I, again, have been with Naaman Center since 2016. So I started out interning there, was a counselor. Up until about a year ago, I was the executive director then over outpatient sites. And then I transitioned into what's called a business development role, which is weird as a social worker. I'm really trying to gain access to treatment. And so it's actually more like a outreach worker. So really working with agencies, working with children and youth, probation, different shelters, different things, with the idea that if someone needs treatment, there's often a lot of barriers to get them into treatment. So I always tell people, like, I can't do the hard work. Like, I can't detox. I can't, fix your relationship problem. Some of those things, I can't do that for you. I can at least break down some of these barriers. And so that's kind of the approach I'm bringing to it. So the training, understanding substance use and trauma through the lens of radical acceptance. So this isn't anything new. So I'm not up here like I'm gonna like reveal some great secret to you guys that's gonna totally change your life. But just again, we're living this on a daily basis. So thinking about just the people we're dealing with. So I just want to kind of call our attention again to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so this is something I challenge myself with kind of continually. So I just want to like have a conversation about this with you. A little bit more about myself also. So my wife has 5 children, ages 7 to 13.
2 of them biological, 3 of them adopted. And when we adopted them, they were ages 7 to 1, a sibling set of 3. So we went from 2 to 5. There was a point in my life when I was working at Fairhaven, I worked with someone who had a lot of adopted children at that time. And I remember it was something my wife and I talked about. And I said, like, I deal so much with trauma and hurt and stuff at work. I don't want to purposely bring that into my home. Again, even with biological children, sometimes like you have it. So it's not, but it feels like more like a choice when you're adopted. So through a series of events, things God changed my heart on that. But so some of the things I'm seeing also, realizing I see it in both places. So I see it with people I work with, I see it in my own children, and I see a lot of aspects in my own life. And just kind of bringing those through together. So some of the things that I want us hopefully to kind of understand or learn kind of through this, understanding human behavior, developing a non-judgmental, compassionate approach, embracing radical acceptance, fostering meaningful connections, reducing stigma, and supporting individuals in the recovery journey. So what does that look like? I think about the story of what it doesn't look like, maybe first. It was a guy I know from high school, so it was about 2 years ago. I bumped into him, and at this point, he's a paid firefighter in the city of Baltimore. So he had done some firefighting locally, volunteer, enjoyed fighting fires. So he went through the training, accepted a paid position in the city of Baltimore. And as we were talking, and he knew at that point, like, that I'm an addictions counselor, and he was talking about, so he was getting called to a lot of just overdose calls. So again, he's a firefighter, we're gonna fight fires, we're gonna go to car accidents, and they're just going out and narcanning people. And so he's like, I know how to end this opioid epidemic. Oh, like, we're all trying to figure this out. Like, no, yeah, he's like, just let them die. And so at first I'm like, but then again, I thought a little bit more like, what are his experiences? What is he seeing? What is his training? And you realize that he's going out day after day, and maybe it's like the same person. And he's like, obviously wants to die, because look at their behavior. They want to die. We have limited resources. This isn't my job description. I'm supposed to be doing something else. Why don't we just let them die? So again, not embracing a lot of those things, not understanding a lot of those things. But that's where he was. And it's one thing, it's, I think, tragic enough if that's a firefighter. It's even more tragic if it's a social worker, if it's us. And so again, when I realized in my own heart, kind of like, am I feeling some of these things? And kind of where is that coming from, and how do I deal with that? So I want to talk a little bit about humans. So again, we are working with humans, and we are humans. So like, what do humans need? And so you'll recognize Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So just the basic, again, physiological needs, so just the needs like for life. So what do we need for life itself? If you take someone and you hold them under the water, everything, like nothing else matters, and they are going to do whatever they can to get up and get a breath of air. So it's just the basic things we need for life. And then building on that. So then if we have our basic needs met, again, then it's health, employment, family, and then beyond that, the love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization, and then just pictures of human connection. So I think, becoming like a connection nerd. And so I think about the neuroscience of and just everything is connected. People are connected. Everything we do is built on relationship, and how that, and I'm just more and more like amazed how like little connections with people, and like being aware of like that affected me profoundly. And for good and for bad, and just realizing how all that is connected. Thinking also, again, kind of like how we physically, like if our needs aren't met, or if physically we're not doing well. And again, we'll tie this in a little bit later with substance use. But so I am someone who does not struggle with suicidality at all. And so I'm blessed with that. But there was a point in my life, so I used to do long distance biking, so pedal biking. And so I had the goal of one time, I was doing a double century, so doing 200 miles in one day. And so I had trained for it, but not trained properly. I also didn't hydrate properly or eat enough. during that ride. So I trained pretty aggressively up to that point, but not giving like rest periods and things like that. So it was a friend and I were doing a 200-mile ride from Harrisonburg, Virginia to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we were at like mile marker 173. So we were in New York City and my body just basically shut down. So like I kept pushing and it kind of set enough. And so I remember I was laying in a patch of grass. And again, we were young and dumb, so we didn't call like EMS, but we called, I think it was my parents or someone, or I think it was his parents, actually, we called his parents. So we were waiting for the ride to come, and I was laying there just like feeling awful. And so there was a police officer that came by, he's like, is there anything I can do to help? And I remember I was laying there, and I just looked up and I saw his gun. And I didn't say it, but like the thought that went through my head is like, put me out of my picture. Like that was like, if you're offering to help, that was what I thought, like that's just what came to my mind. And I realized it's like, oh, the situation I was in, just physically, just from the choices I made that day and the few, weeks before, I was at a drastically different altered state of mind. And in that moment, and so again, I wasn't actively trying to take my life, but that was kind of my first thought because of where, so again, that ties into just being human and realizing how much that affects us. Before I worked with people, I worked with cars. So I used to work in an auto body shop. When I left auto body for social work, I said there was going to be days that I just want to come back with a hammer and pound on some metal. Actually, I haven't experienced many of those days because I really enjoy working with people. And so I go back and sometimes visit that shop and I'm like, I am so thankful I'm out doing other things. So I took a couple pictures of my car and just thinking about like, what do cars need? So I don't know if you've ever noticed, there's a little sticker that says like oil change. And so a good rule of thumb, when you're like 10,000 miles past that, get into the shop. But we know that like regular oil changes with the car. If you buy a brand new car, you never change the oil, the engine will eventually lock up. Like it is designed to have regular oil changes. Safety, emissions stickers. Fun fact about that, if those are out and you get pulled over by a police officer, you can get 2 tickets, one for the emission sticker, one for the inspection sticker. So 2. So again, with that, yearly, we take it to a licensed professional who's trained how to work with it, and they assess it. They say, okay, how are the brakes? How are the tires? How is this? States that don't have that, so I have family live in Iowa, they don't have safety inspection stickers. They have like Flintstone mobiles. Like they're so rusted out, if you put your feet down, like you can touch the ground. And you see, cars driving around like metal on metal with brakes and things like that. So there's a reason why we look at it and say, this might need replaced. And then my favorite is never open when hot. So the radiator, so when the engine's running, it gets hot. And it's saying, FYI, don't unscrew this thing when it's hot. Like hot liquid will come out. So I was thinking, what if, you can get t-shirts with anything. So like, what if please don't address me while I'm in crisis. Like, do not, and there are lots of mugs, like, don't talk to me before my first cup of coffee. Things like that, where we realize this, we know this about people, but are we continually acting? Like, do we go out every morning, run the car for or we drive to work and then we open the radiator cap and they're like, what just happened? And the next day you do the same thing. You're like, what just happened? What is going on with this car? And we're like, but we knew that about the car. Like, this isn't actually surprising. So I want to just call us to human first approach. And with that is primarily the individual we're working with is first human. And then secondly, they might be addicted to substances. They might be struggling with mental health. They may not currently have a house. They may be screaming at me. They may be really annoying. Primarily, they're human. All those things are secondary. Again, we know that with different diagnosis or, just the way language has changed, where we're putting the human first. So it's a person with autism, or, a person who's using a wheelchair, things like that. So just reminding ourselves. So again, things that we know about humans, and we're learning more and more about neuroscience, about how our bodies, our brains work together, about relationships. And it's interesting, we're discovering new things, but I feel like the more we discover, it actually isn't anything new. It's still like the basic, what my grandmother taught me. But we realize like, oh, brain scans are actually showing this, or we see why things work that way. So again, primarily human. That is the first thing. And then also, I am primarily human. So one of the things I do at my job also, I supervise interns who are in their master's programs, going into counseling, and then also some counselors that are going for licensure. So talking with counselors, interns about caseloads and things like that is always fascinating. So talking to an intern this week and talking to a client, she's like, I really need to talk about this. Like, this person is really annoying me. And I don't totally know why, but I'm like surprised because like I should be better than this. But the way it came out, and just like, and I didn't let it show, but like, and so we talked about it, like, okay, so what was going on? What were they doing? What was that triggering in you? Why did that annoy you so much? And again, we were actually able to talk through that and figure that out. But that's because she's primarily human also. So all these things that we say about clients and their experiences and their attachment styles and that all applies to me. And then we're having a relationship together. So primarily human. And then just looking at different things. So I'm going to look at just a couple of substances and then trauma. But just the way it affects. And again, this isn't anything new. But when you think about meth-induced psychosis or someone that's using large amounts of meth, when I was a fairly new counselor, I was doing a intake, someone that was using meth. And so I did a really good counselor question. So it was, partway through, I was like, so tell me what your day looks like. From the moment you get up to the moment you go to bed, like what's it look like? And he's like, I use meth. I don't go to bed. Like I haven't slept in 3 days. I'm like, okay, fair. And then you realize like, oh, maybe some of the things we're seeing also are from not sleeping. So you take any of us, even without meth, and you don't sleep for 3 days, you're gonna be in a slightly different spot. So again, hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking and behavior. And then picture working with that person. So is the questions that I'm asking them, the setting we're in, what does that look like if they have difficulty concentrating? Unpredictable or violent behavior, extreme paranoia, so believing they're being watched, followed, or spied on. We'll talk a little bit later then about like our perceptions. So again, we live our lives out of our perceptions. What we're perceiving is how we act. So if someone is perceiving that people are trying to harm them, they're being watched, followed, me saying that's not happening is not like super effective because they're actually perceiving that. They're going to act out of that understanding. Any thoughts on, again, you guys are like working with people on a regular basis. Any, I guess, comments on what I said so far, or when you're working with someone who's maybe not in the right frame of mind? After you get past the frustration of the initial like.
Usually, in our case, if we have somebody that has all those issues, we don't complete the intake because the person obviously can take any decision at that moment. We direct them to come back next day when their mind is better. So, that's basically what we do in our project.
Yeah, so that's also a good point. Different settings, so not everyone's appropriate for every setting. And so each program, each organization has to know like, what are we able to handle? What are we able to accept? And again, if this person's maybe under the influence of a certain state of mind, we actually can't do certain things. I was talking to someone recently who said I was kidnapped. And this was after they had completed a detox and rehab stay. I was like, really? They're like, yeah, I was in Philly. I was standing in line for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I woke up in detox. And they were like, that like literally, I was getting a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I woke up in detox, and they're like, they must have kidnapped me. And so again, what we know about substances and things like that, I'm like, well, actually, you probably were. I didn't bother like talking through it, but I was thinking about it later. I'm like, I don't know, a lot of facilities that literally kidnap people, like someone like completely passed out, and you like load them in the trunk, take them to detox. But I was like, he probably was talking, and obviously not in the right frame of mind. And someone's probably like, hey, we have a bed for you. Like, will you go to detox? He's like, yeah, sure, whatever. You know, hopped in the car, did it, and actually did the intake, because I think he was saying he didn't really remember the intake. And then, so the last thing he remembers now, standing in line for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then there was this lapse of time, and then he remembers being in a detox facility. But in that moment, again, I don't know that situation. He was probably walking and talking, and obviously not like super coherent, but enough that legally someone, you know, did the intake. And again, he was going to detox. Going to a long-term facility or something like that is different. With outpatient counseling, we had that approach. If someone is obviously under the influence, we're actually not going to complete an outpatient counseling setting because they're actually not, again, they're not coherent enough to have that counseling setting. Now, we might do an intervention and we're trying to, okay, what help him? We're not going to sit here and process things though, because you're not going to remember and you're not in the right frame of mind. So it's actually unethical to conduct a counseling session in that. So fentanyl use, again, so human first approach, first person is primarily human. You know, dizziness, fainting, nausea, confusion, disorientation, short-term use, overdose. So again, when we think about fentanyl, opioids, we think the concern is the overdose, which happens from the respiratory system slowing down to the point that they're not breathing. And then long-term effects. So again, depression, anxiety, severe withdrawal symptoms, high risk of overdose or death. So just understanding some of those things. Severe withdrawal symptoms when stopping. I remember at the outpatient level, like sometimes someone would come in and they're like mainlining heroin daily, and they're like, so you know, you're recommending detox, and like, no, I'm gonna stop. Like, I'm just gonna go, like, I'm done. I'm just gonna go home and whatever. I deleted my dealer's number and I'll be okay. And so just understanding some of the physical things of that. I've never detoxed from fentanyl and I've never given birth. But I remember a lady in group when we were talking about it said she was like, detoxing was worse than like 9 pregnancies. And so I was like, that sounds bad. Like, and it's different for everyone, but just what we know about it, we're like the likelihood of someone being dependent on opioids, going home and detoxing is very, very unlikely. And so that's where we're using kind of like what we know about it to talk to them. So we say like the client's the authority on themselves. They know, but then we have additional information. And so just talking through someone, like, again, in a case like that, it's not a hostage situation. If they want to leave our office and go home and try it, they can. But it's imperative that we at least give them the information. And we said, like, this is very unlikely to be successful. These are some other tools, some other things that may be helpful. Are you familiar with big T and little t trauma? Are people in favor of big T or little t trauma talking about it that way? Okay, so anytime you like talk about something, there's also like a reason why you shouldn't talk about it that way. So I read an article recently of someone saying, so the idea that like all trauma is trauma, and if you use the term little t, it's minimizing it. So if I've experienced little t trauma, you're like, oh, that's just little t. You're like, that's not a big deal. I had big T. So just to like put that out there, when I say big T, little t, I'm not saying like one's a big deal and the other one really doesn't matter. But when we think about big T and little t, like big T as typically like a large event. Again, it can be something that happens repeatedly, but something that at just one instance causes trauma. And so again, some of the things from trauma, so flashbacks, nightmares, disturbing dreams, avoidance, so avoiding people, difficult sleeping, trouble concentrating, panic attacks, chronic pain or tension, depression or hopelessness. So think about any of these things alone. So if you say, okay, I'm gonna pick 3 of those symptoms and I'm gonna embody them, that's not fun. That changes the way I show up in the morning. It changes the way I interact. It changes the way I respond to the questions you're asking me. It changes the way I respond to, my bunkmate, or how well I stand in line to get food, those things. The reason those things are happening is because of some other event. So if you could even get rid of the other event and I still have those things, that's not fun. Put that on top of some major event happening. I was meeting with someone in Lancaster Prison recently, severe mental health, addiction, and talking about, again, he was actually in the hole because of behavioral problems that happened while he was in prison. He was in prison for parole violation, for an assault. So it's just a lot of like behavioral stuff. But talking with him, a lot of stuff started at age 15. So residential mental health stays at 15, some severe opioid, cocaine use at 15, also a pretty traumatic abuse by his father at age 15. And just realizing like a lot of that stem, and then, 15, 20 years later, a lot of life happened, a lot of behavioral things that just continues to make it worse and worse and worse and worse. Going back to human first approach though, he recently had a son who was in the system, and he's like, I want to be different. I want to be a good dad. Like, I want to be there for my son. And so I was like, wow. Like, and the things he experienced from his dad, he still realized like, this is what a good dad looks like. And I want to be this for my son. Another thing that happened, so we're sitting on the block. They brought him out of his cell so we could talk. And he's there handcuffed behind his back to sign the papers. He had to go back in his cell, so they want to unhandcuff him, even on the block. But there were other guys yelling back and forth, and he's like, I'm sorry for them yelling. And I was like, it's not your fault. Like he's like, some people don't have any respect. And so then I realized in that moment, I was like, he's treating me as human. Like, he's here and he's like, this guy came here and we're having a conversation. There's 2 other people yelling and they're not respecting this. And he's like, and so he literally apologized for someone else yelling. So then little t, again, thinking about just kind of continual things. So that could be just neglect from a parent, or relationships. Just, it could be anything. With little t also, it's a little bit trickier because it doesn't always affect. So again, if someone's like sexually abused, whatever, your house burns down, some of these things, it's where I was like, okay, that was traumatic. Like, and again, even those larger things affect people differently. But some of the smaller, just daily things, we're like, well, wait a minute, we grew up in the same house. Like, I'm fine. And like, my kid brother, like, I don't know what happened, but like, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, I shook it off. Like, he's messed up from that. And you realize it affects different people differently. Part of that, again, is we understand child development. So the age that it happens can have a big deal. And then going back to human connection, how connected you are. So even with a traumatic event, how well people respond to that. So again, if you're abused and you tell the parents and they're like, we don't talk about it, that affects you drastically different than if they listen and you get the help you need. So with the little t, the kind of the daily things, again, partly it's how connected we are at the moment, and then also developmentally, and again, things affect people differently. But some of these same symptoms then from kind of continual trauma can surface. So when we think about humans, we think about, again, the symptoms and what people are dealing with, kind of how that shows up. I have kind of three ways of showing up for people. And so I like to living with a posture of, so when we think about like, how are we positioning ourselves? So first is humility, to realize like, I have limited perception and my experience is not your experience. So again, we're all human. We have different experiences. And also I'm seeing this situation. So I have training, I have experience, all of this. I have good people around me. I still am only seeing a limited amount. I want to do a little thing to show you kind of like what that looks like. Can I have a volunteer who is not colorblind? I love people who are colorblind also, but like I tried doing this and then the person told me they're colorblind. So can someone, okay, you can see color? Okay. Do you mind coming up front? Yes. So I promise I will not. I should hurt you. I will sit there. I am going to hold something behind your head. And so again, this is just about our perceptions, what we can see. I'll explain a little bit more later. So I am going to slowly bring something around the side of your head.
Okay. Which side?
Will be your right side. Good asking questions. I'm going to slowly bring it around. If you look straight ahead, but then you'll see something in your peripheral vision. So tell me when you can see something, and then tell me if you can see what color it is. Okay. So I'm just going to slowly bring it around and tell me when you can see it. Just
I can start to see it.
Okay. What color is it?
I have no idea.
Okay. So I'm going to keep bringing it and then tell me when you see color.
I see green.
Okay. Good. Then we're going to do it around the other side.
Okay.
Same thing. So tell me when you can see it.
I can start to, is it red?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Okay. You can sit there.
Okay, great.
So with our perception, just we have our sense. So again, we're humans, we're living in our bodies, we have senses. And so we're constantly perceiving the world. So there's a lot of physical things that are going on that we're sensing, we're taking information, and then when we perceive it though, so we're sensing certain things, but then we're running through a filter of all of our experiences, everything that happened, whatever, and then we kind of come out and we perceive something. So that was an example of just visual and just what we're receiving. And so with our eyes, we have cones and rods are the two different types of sensors in our eyes. Cones are more in the center of the eye, and they see in color, and they see like high definition. So thinking about like what something is, the cones. Rods are like peripheral vision. On the outside, rods see black and white, which is also when you're driving. I used to think that like light difference was only pupils like dilating and letting more light in, but it's also if there's light differences, sometimes it's like rods and cones kind of bouncing back and forth, trying to get that. So with that, if you're bringing it around, typically your rods are picking it up first. So in your peripheral vision, you're seeing something, but you can't see what color it is. Bring it around a little bit further, and then your cones actually pick up the color. So again, that's how we're designed, and so we can only see certain things. So another thing with my experience is not your experience. I have limited perception. So you might have picked up this is actually two-sided, two different colors. So you know that now. If you didn't know it and I hold it up, like what color is this? What color are you seeing? Red. Okay. I'm seeing red. And so there's a couple things we could do with this. One, I could post on social media that I went to a training today and everyone, they were complete idiots. Like it was a very obvious red tube and they all said it was green. So like if it's a political situation, you could do that. You could say the other side, like, I don't know what they're thinking, but they're like completely off, like completely off. Or I could say like, you're saying green, I'm saying red. So one, maybe you're colorblind, maybe I'm colorblind. maybe there is more to this. So again, we could start talking through it, like, why are you saying it's green? And again, we could even like look at something else. So like, I think it's red. It looks similar to like the stripes on that flag. Like, is that what it looks like? No, that's red. This is green. Like, okay, what about her jacket over there? Yeah, that's green. And we can start getting additional information. We start talking, and then even without flipping it, as humans, with talking, we could probably get to the point where like, I think it's green on your side and it's red on my side. And so with this, in a case like that, I might actually have correct vision and I'm perceiving it correctly, but we're actually seeing different things. And again, I'm not saying universal, like choose your own reality here. I'm saying sometimes we're seeing different sides of something. And just being willing to, out of humility, say, like, I'm seeing this side of it. Is there another side that I'm not seeing? And being willing to talk about it. And then again, my experience is not your experience. And again, that's a deeper thing, but realizing the way we perceive the world is through the lens of everything that's happened to us up until this point. And so even if we are seeing the same thing, the same color, to realize the way I'm responding is based on my experiences. Your experiences are different than mine. And so you are responding differently, even if we're seeing the same thing. The other thing with this is, again, just realizing how the eyes work. If I hold this thing, like right here, it's much closer to my eyes than yours. It's like 6 inches from my head. And you're looking at me and you're like, I think you have something like behind your head. I'm like, no, I don't see anything. And you're like, no, I'm pretty sure you got something there. Like, whatever, yeah. And so sometimes working with other people, we're like, what are you saying that I'm missing? And sometimes the proximity to the things that can see, sometimes we're like, no, I'm really close to this situation. I know what's going on. And it's like, well, no, actually someone a little bit further removed from the situation has a better angle and they're actually seeing it better. And so sometimes we have to be willing, again, in humility, to say, can I get another set of eyes on this? Because I realize actually my eyes, the way they're designed, they can't see certain things. So again, that works in my own life. There's certain things like, what are you seeing in this situation? The curiosity. So there's a book called What Happened to You? Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Does anyone read this?
Yes.
So it's talking about, again, the idea, so it's called Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. And talking about kind of the idea of saying what happened to you instead of like, what's wrong with you? Because again, certain behavior, we're like, this is maladaptive behavior. This is not healthy. Like there's healthier behavior we could help you with, but like, what's wrong with you? Like, and just to take a step back and like, what happened to you? Again, going back to like, what are experiences that brought you to this point? Again, maybe it's current substances you're on. Maybe it's trauma that happened. Maybe it's the way you've seen this model. You know, like you've heard the story, or maybe you haven't, but there's the old joke about the kid that was like swearing in school, just like constantly like language, and they were working the language, like, trying to figure this out. And you know, they're like, man, they're like, he's not getting it, you know, and they tried like suspension and all that. And then so they bring in the parents and they're like, you know, like little Johnny has like bad mouth, like he's not, you know, the dad's like, what the heck, Johnny? Like, da-da-da, you know, and they're like, oh, okay. Like, now we understand. Again, we can tell him all day that this isn't, like, maybe that's the only thing he's ever heard. So again, just kind of that curiosity, like, what happened to you? What are possible things that could have led to this? Again, and what is your perception? What are you seeing, and why? And then realizing it's always a goal of, if it is maladaptive behavior, if it is something like you can't stay here like this is not appropriate, this is not helping you, then we're also trying to move beyond it. Like, what is the best way forward? So again, based on these things, this is what you're seeing, this is what you're experiencing, this is what has happened. How can we move forward? Part of that is modeling healthy relationships, and also again figuring out other things. And then radical acceptance. So Marshall Linhan, the founder of DBT, talks a lot about radical acceptance. In DBT, there's workbooks and a lot of things about radical acceptance, which is the kind of the idea of accepting this moment exactly as it is. And so again, accepting it as it is not saying it's okay. It's not saying it's right. It's also accepting things that have happened as they are. So again, it's not saying this trauma that happened, this whatever, that it was okay, but it's saying it is, that it happened, or in this moment. So in the DBT workbooks and things, a lot of it is for the client, like working on themselves. So like accepting the moment as it is. And it's the idea that if we can't accept it, then we actually can't like move beyond it. So the idea, I don't know if you've heard the term of like stop shooting on yourself. And so it's like, should be this, should be that, should be this, that, and the other thing, and just like stop it. Like it is what it is. And then how do we move beyond that? But as long as we're, as humans, we have limited emotional, physical, mental energy. And if we're putting the energy towards something that won't change or can't change, we have less energy to put towards the things that can change. So if we're spending all of our time saying like, should be different, should be different, should be different, we actually have less than to put towards actually changing. So that part of like this moment is exactly as it is, and then we're talking about how to move beyond it. So one thing that Marshall Linhan says is radical acceptance rests on letting go of the illusion of control and a willingness to notice and accept things as they are right now without judging. So again, there's a lot of things we can't. And so I'm thinking about this more. So again, radical acceptance in our own lives is important. I'm thinking about in this talk a little bit more of like the people we're working with, or sometimes the behaviors and things that are happening. And it's like, I actually can't change that anytime. With the intern, when we were talking about that client in the group, one of the things we were talking about is like, okay, so what can you change in this situation? And one of the things that she was able to change is the way she viewed it and the way she responded. And so I'm going to let this client annoy me less because I'm going to work through some of it. I'm going to realize why it was annoying me and actually going to be more successful and have more energy to pour into that client instead of being like, shouldn't do that. They shouldn't do that. Then the idea that this behavior is sensible based on all contributing factors. And so again, I'm saying this is about working with people, not ourselves. I believe it's true for ourselves also. So again, the behavior that this person is displaying right now, kind of no matter what that is, that based on everything that happened from them to them, based on their current mental state, based on just their being human, it's actually sensible behavior. Is that, what are some thoughts on that? And I'm completely fine if you disagree with me. Yes.
I mean, sensible as in it makes sense or it's acceptable?
Okay, good question. Yeah, so I purposely used the word sensible, and there might even be a better word. So yeah, I did not use the word acceptable. I did not use the word like right. I did not use the word healthy, or any of those. But yeah, I use the word sensible as in it makes sense. Another kind of form of radical acceptance is that if everyone is making the very best decision that they can, again, based on all of those things. So it's saying the reason I did this is because like I ran everything through an algorithm in my mind, and this was the decision that I made. Even if that's punching a police officer in the face, which everyone was like, not a good thing to do. The reason I did it is because of everything that was going on. And again, maybe it was going back to some of that paranoia. Maybe I'm not thinking logically. Maybe like the things I'm perceiving are not correct. But based on the things I'm perceiving, that where I am mentally, based on everything I was taught about police officers and whatever, and he's in my face, the best thing, and again, I'm using sensible instead of like best or correct or whatever. that it actually made sense that in that moment, I punched him.
But it's also part of recognizing those behaviors, you know, because as you say, it's not that it's the normal or you have to accept it.
Mhm.
It's part that, you know, though whatever you do, you know, if it's mental health, or if it's addiction, you will have some consequences. You have to recognize that you have some issues and you will have that, that's why you behave in that way. As you say, if we punch the police officer, it's partly because, you know, maybe you're under the influences, you have anger issues, and that's why the behavior that you have in that moment, or whenever somebody's trying to tell you, you have to stop it, you have to stop with it.
Right, so going back, it's not saying that it's okay, it's not saying, and even as agencies or staff, it's not saying like, we have to be okay with this behavior, it's not like, oh, okay, they're just at a bad spot. Like, no, there's certain things you can't do, but it's bringing back, like, viewing it from human eyes and saying like, why, because the other thing is like, why do they keep doing it? Like, it doesn't make sense, like, we just talked about this yesterday. They do this one more time, they're not going to do this again.
And a lot of the time, people, so some people use some behaviors as consequences. They say, oh, I'm behaving like that because I didn't take my pills. And you hear that in therapy a lot, even in schools where the kids, oh, I'm behaving like that because my mom didn't give me the medication. But it's right, it's the medication. If you know that you have to take your medication, take it. Because you can't be hitting people or disrespecting people or not following direction because you know that you have to take your medication. You know, it's recognizing I have an issue and I have to try to keep myself.
And yes.
The distinction that I find helpful is that there's a difference between a reason and an excuse.
And it's sensible that the worker can connect the dots based on the information they have. That's why they did what they did or the choice they made.
Yes.
Did you say sensible and the definition would be it makes sense and that it was the best they could do? Or did I hear it?
Yeah, so I said there is an extra definition that you could say it's the best, but I know a lot of people are like, it wasn't really the best. So like, I almost like take a step back from that just because like I don't want to get booed out of the room. But sensible, but I honestly truly do believe that again, if you describe it in that way, but yes, sensible as in it makes sense. The reason they did that is because it actually made sense to them. And so sometimes simple things like, you know, if you did that, you weren't going to be on stage here tonight. You know, if you did that, you know, you're going to get locked. Like we told you one more time, you're going back to prison. There was a guy recently that I was talking to, probation was trying to get him to treatment. And he was kind of like, wasn't sure if he was going to go, whatever. And so part of my job, I can actually transport people. So I literally drove to his house. He finally came out, his girlfriend was there. He had just used like, again, like that one last time before you go. Not thinking clearly, and you know, and he's like, man, you know, some like car, you know, and he knew like if he doesn't go, he's going back to not just going, he's going to state. Like if he doesn't go, and it literally came down, he's like, man, and it came down to like a power struggle where his PO was like, man, she can't do that. And in that moment, he walked off. And I'm just like, oh. And he went like upstate. But in that moment, again, he's like, well, one, he's not thinking clearly. He's under the influence. But then in that moment, he's like, I hopped in this car. This lady is like going to get her way. And I'm not going to let her get that. They're like, is that worth sitting there for 2 years? You know, and there's so much more. But like in that moment, like that's, and he was actually talking enough that I knew a little bit of what was going on. Sometimes we have no clue what's going on. And I'm like, that actually kind of makes sense. Like, not good. Like, I don't agree with that, but like, I understand like where you're coming from there.
Is that another word you could use? Behavior is understandable.
Understandable.
Based on all.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. And part of then I think my job is like trying to understand. And we're like, what? And so again, that goes back to like, what happened to you? We're kind of curious, like, how are you getting to this point? And I realize oftentimes when this behavior is happening, it's not a great time to like, let's sit down with coffee and let's talk through this, you know? But still, just like, what? How could we understand? Yeah.
In the trauma practice model that we use, we would say the behavior is not surprising or to be expected.
Yes.
If someone has experienced a lot of trauma, we're working with survivors of domestic violence,
Yeah.
so there's all kinds of things going on. Their brains are altered. So the behaviors are a result of that. The idea of believing that someone's doing the best they can in that moment is a very powerful idea. Doing the best they can with what they have. And the way that their brains have been impacted by what they've experienced. Yet as practitioners, despite knowing this, we continue to be surprised by behavior that is not surprising. You know, so there's something more to it than just an individual's choices that they're making when we see that this is happening widely and across the board with folks that we're working with. So it's unsurprising. It's to be expected. We go so far as to say it's to be expected.
Yeah, right.
And we have to go from there, accept that and go from there.
Yeah. And I realize I'm trying to fit like a ton of information in a short time. So like I wish there's so much more to talk about. But again, with young children in my home, and with various different life experiences and then working with adults. So one, it's like, I think I just saw that behavior like last night at home, like, and you're like 30 years older, but like, the one thing is understanding also how trauma, how substances affect the brain. And so sometimes it's like, okay, so if this person were 2, would I be surprised or would I expect that? And so again, looking at it at different things, and again, we don't know what happened necessarily, but again, we know enough about different things to be like, we're going to kind of expect some of this. Actually, another story from when I was interning, this was actually at Water Street, like a long time ago, where someone, and I forget, so someone wasn't able to stay the night. I forget if it was even short term or long term, but yeah, it was something that they were gonna have to leave. And so they were, life coach was like processing, and they're like, I'm just gonna go kill myself. And so I was like, okay. So I remember sitting, again, I'm like very green, so I like sat with the individual while I think crisis was called. But just looking back, like, actually, that makes a lot of sense. You're like, well, wait a minute. If I say I'm going to kill myself, you can't just put me out on the street. So like, that's really resourceful. And so to realize like, oh, that, and I remember like a little bit of the frustration coming out of the life coach in that moment. It's like, and again, they, handled it appropriately. But just to realize like, yeah, it's difficult. And that's where I think all these things, even if it makes sense or we're not surprised by it, it's really, really difficult. And so again, just kind of putting those together, just living with a posture, you're saying these people I'm working with, living with humility, with curiosity, and with radical acceptance. And I always tell our counselors, like, you're putting yourself in close proximity to hurting people. And so do not be surprised when you find yourself in close proximity to hurting people. So there's different jobs that we can do. And depending on the job, you're going to be closer to certain things. So like, if you're working at McDonald's, do not be surprised if you come in contact with a French fry. Like, could happen. To realize like the field that you're working in, the things that you're doing, this person in front of me has severe trauma, has addiction, is making choices that are not healthy, that will not work out well for them. And if they would do something a little bit different, it would be better. I chose to be close to this person. And again, we have it in our own lives, Sometimes we have it in family, we have it in things that maybe we can't distance ourselves from. Work is something that we chose, and we chose it for a reason. And it does make a difference. So thank you for what you're doing. You are making a difference. It is valuable. And yeah, I know, again, going back to the human connection and things, like we don't know what it would be like. But I think about like It's a Wonderful Life, or just the movie, or just different things. Like, what if this one person were removed? So just think about like, what would Lancaster County be like if all of you went and just worked for corporate America, or all of you were suddenly just removed from the situation? And so sometimes it's like, I don't know if I'm making, you know, again, I Narcan this person, but the third time, I don't know if I'm making any difference. Like, you guys are making a difference. So thank you. This is, yeah, my information. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'd love to talk to people.
Anytime, 2, 3 in the morning.
Self-care, that's a separate training.
But if you did, it would be.
I turned my phone off.
It would make sense.
I turn my phone off at night. So I always say, if I answer, I'm awake. If I don't answer, I'm sleeping, and you will not wake me. So like, I turn my phone off. And full disclosure, sometimes put the kids to bed, you know, good time, and like 8:30, 9 o'clock, I'm in bed. It's funny, like people text me, and I'm like, they're not thinking I'm in bed right now. Guess what? I am. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys. Thanks so much for coming. We have the room until 11. So please feel free to, we are not running away. Feel free to connect with, there's a wide variety of things here. Lots of varying levels too, right here. For example, waterfront life coaches up to the Lily coaching. So we have a wide spread to connect with. So thank you very much for coming. If you've not signed the sign-in sheet, please do. And please scan the QR code, take the survey, and let us know which other trainings you'd like to see. And we can make sure that we put them all on. Thank you guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Simon.
Very much. That's